Yeah. I was going to say, Duane, that, uh, one of the, uh, one of the most important things that I learned from a particular mentor of mine was that it's all about placement of attention. You know, where do we place our attention? And you were just quoting this wonderful quote from Marge Barlow, that the opposite of old is not young, the opposite of old is new. Well, that is a great quote because it encourages you to shift your attention from trying to be young to just cultivating newness, you know? And you're right. You mentioned that, you and I both have this feeling of kind of thriving creativity, but it comes from everything we've done and
Mm.
everything we've been before. It doesn't come out of nowhere. It comes out of the fact that so far we're surviving and thriving, And yeah.
And some degree of curiosity.
Yes.
Your imaginative curiosity is a driving force in your life.
Yes.
And my explorations are a little different, but and and they're still curious. I don't feel like I have the answers.
No.
I feel like with the people I work with, I walk alongside them. I do not give them any answers. I walk alongside and let them find, with some guidance, their own answers.
That's
And
great.
that's different from when I coached in corporate America. We had a template, and it was
Yeah.
about performance because that's how companies would buy our services.
Sure.
And
Sure.
so this time in my life, it's about, I want to just serve people who are curious and want to move forward in some way.
Yeah. And
As
it's
that happens. Yeah.
I often say that if somebody tells you that they have the answers, run in the opposite direction, because if somebody asks me to answer something, sometimes I'll just respond the regular way. But if I'm doing this formally, answering a question like on a blog or whatever, I will say, well, I don't offer answers, I'll offer a response, you know.
Wow.
In other words, I will share with you how I respond to that, but I'm not going to try to give answers. You just kind of said that you do the same thing with
Yeah.
your, when you are working with people, you don't really tell them what to do or give them an answer as much as I love what you said. You kind of walk beside them, you accompany them.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think
It's an interesting time because people are frustrated and they're afraid,
Mhm.
and
Understand.
uncertainty is bigger than ever.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yet, it's real life. How do we go between this
Yeah.
third dimensional everyday life and
Mhm.
then having a higher view and looking down? And we've talked about that before. So,
Right. Right. And yeah, and it's interesting about fear. There's this kind of cliche that love and fear are opposites. Well, fear is not a terrible thing to admit to either, but I think what's really valuable with fear is to discern, okay, what is, uh, justified fear. As human beings, we can carry around fears of things that are not happening. They're not happening now, and they may never happen. That's just our human nature. We're mentally capable of carrying around a narrative about, oh, this might happen or this is happening. And if we can try to discern, get clarity on what is really happening now, here, so often there just isn't any disaster at the moment. There may be
yeah,
something we're dealing with. Yeah, but it's not a disaster and it's not really threatening. If you're crossing a busy street, you need to be a little bit scared because, oh, you got to watch for the traffic, that's justified fear because it's like, oh, that guy nearly ran me down. Scary. But most of the time, that's not what's happening, you know?
it takes us back to awareness.
Exactly.
Awareness.
Placement, placement of attention.
Yes, yes. And
Yeah.
another thing is I discern more um, from my studies in Peru,
Hmm.
the way they describe, the way Don Americo described energy was there's no bad energy. It's just dense and heavy, or it's light.
Hmm. Hmm.
That's a continuum.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when I shift that heavy energy, or to say, I'm going to see it from my own response, not from external.
Yeah.
I have the knob and I'm going to tune into a little higher frequency. And sometimes if I just raise my hands, it helps, get me back in the present moment. Like in this very moment, I'm okay.
I've noticed you do that, and that's great because I think that what the mental narratives that are, not necessarily what's going on and often encourage us to believe is that, the universe is a battle between good and evil, or even if it's not just that in an objective way, it's sort of like right and wrong or better and worse. And yet, I think what you just said about the energy, it's just either kind of like this heavier energy or this lighter energy, but it's not really as polarized as the stories we can tell ourselves might suggest, you know?
Yes, because that duality doesn't really give us choice. It's
Yeah,
only until we have three or more options do we start having choice. So if we're stuck in either or, right or wrong, good or bad, up or down, we're stuck. We don't have that broader scope of perception.
yeah, the both and. Some people call that the both and,
Yes,
because and is almost the most important part of that, right?
yes. Because a but just negates what you just said.
Exactly, and as a writer myself, I've gotten really, really aware of how true that is. The word and can be useful, but as you're editing your own writing, you can almost always just break your sentences into shorter, more graceful sentences by just cutting out the and. Just put a punctuation and say and, cross out the and start your next sentence. But the problem with but is it negates something.
Yes,
And,
yes.
maybe you didn't even need to say that. Um,
That's how
yeah,
we get in our way. We stop ourselves.
exactly. That's right.
Yeah, hard stop. Boom.
That's right. That's right. And yeah, so I guess, sometimes I'm kind of in editorial mode in terms of how I think and how I function, but some of that is valuable because human beings, we are very verbal creatures. We think in language a lot. And
And music and pictures. I had a dream last night
oh
that
yeah.
I was coming onto a expressway
Hmm.
and I needed to get over way over 4 lanes to the left.
Hmm.
And I got out of the vehicle, walked across trying to get to those other lanes. It was like change lanes in a
Whoa.
different modality. It was this just came up. So paying attention to those, what lane am I in? How am I coming on? How am I getting over? Speaking of metaphors, it's just interesting to ponder all the possibilities about those visuals.
Yeah, and I think that, I when I say this thing about narratives and stories, how they can, we can mislead ourselves or they can like take us to, negative places. That certainly doesn't mean I don't value stories. I think as human beings, stories are so important. And it's one of the main things we do is tell stories. But I think that what's really important too is to be aware of the quality of the stories. Like it could either be a true story, as true as you can tell that you experienced, or it's just basically anything but your own immediate experience is going to be made up in a way. It's if it's secondhand, it's just a story, but if it could be a really good story, you know,
Mhm,
might be
mhm.
inspired by things that you've seen and observed or things that have happened. And then it may actually talk about some really valuable and important things. So
And we
stories, great. I mean,
see ourselves in each other's stories, reflections often.
yes.
And you're so good at that in your writing. I was going to go back to what you said earlier about your responses.
Hmm.
I really love how you phrase that because we can react and
Yeah.
make up something to contradict what someone said, or we can go or agree with them, or we can go into our deep own our response, which
Yeah,
is honest, and more integrous.
exactly. And it might be, um, it might, instead of, an answer sounds awfully kind of like a pool ball hitting another pool ball and clunk against the side, whereas a response could be several different possibilities. If I'm writing a response, I'll quite often say, well, this may be what's happening, but it could be this also. And I always feel it's so important to acknowledge the mystery and the unknown. You talked about, the unknown is scary, and it is sometimes. I mean, it can be very scary not to know. Like, if you're going to move if you need to move, which I haven't, thank goodness, for decades now. I've been in the same house, but I do know that great uh insecurity that comes from the uncertainty of, like, where am I going to go or what am I going to do? Um, but the unknown, if you think about it deeply, is the source of our freedom of choice too.
Yes.
You know?
I love the not knowing what I don't know. And there's a story I tell about my first year in college in a communications class.
Uh-huh.
And our final exam was to give a 3-minute impromptu speech.
Ah,
So it's a
right.
hot summer day, and I go to class, and I'm trying to calculate how many people are in the room and when my call will come. And anyway, I put my hand in the fishbowl and drew out the topic,
Yeah.
moonshine in the cellar. And I began to spin this beautiful story of a young, enamored couple in a basement with a big window with ivy and the moon shining through. And
Mm.
I started to hear some kind of chuckles in the room. It was nearly all guys. I think there were 2 or 3 of us girls. And then I thought, well, I'm just getting started. So I amped it up and then enamored the big kiss and all this stuff. By the time I was finished with my 3 minutes, the whole room was roaring. And I thought, well, I did a good job. So I went up to the professor. He gave me my grade. It was an A plus. And he looked at me and said, you really don't know what moonshine is, do you?
But you
I
do.
did, and
You
I
truly,
did.
you do. The moonshine is the light that comes from the moon. They're all
And that,
sitting there thinking
that,
prohibition.
that was my response. And so I
Yeah.
created a new belief that not knowing can be a really good thing.
Yes, exactly. You went into a beautiful place and created a wonderful life enhancing story that was romantic and sweet and had a lot of beauty to it. And they might have gone like, oh no, the police whistles are coming. They're coming to bust us because our still is in the basement.
And I didn't know. So it was literal to me, Sean.
Sure.
But
That's
I love that. And it's happened to me more than once. When I claimed it, that it was okay to not know, it
sure.
opened up a whole different world to me.
Yeah, isn't that wonderful, actually? It is. That's great.
So I want to shift our talk here about aging to the physical, because
Yes.
one thing I cannot deny is I'm not as strong as I used to be physically.
Yeah.
Things are different.
Uh-huh.
And so
Sure.
I've been thinking about what's
Sure.
true. And one of the things I've come to the conclusion that I can accept is I'm
Hmm.
becoming more transparent as I age,
Mm.
less physical and more transparent.
Mm.
So I'm not holding on to the fact that I'm losing something. I'm just really allowing me to show through differently.
Mm. That's interesting. Yeah. Yeah. I'm pondering what that means, I guess, you know. Um, I think I know what you mean, kind of, but I'm not sure I really do, you know? Um, I think that, opacity, being opaque to me often implies something that it all seems to be visible, but it's so obvious it's not by any means the whole story, you know? So to me, this kind of transparency, and I have no idea that this is at all what you mean by it, Joanne, but to me, the kind of transparency you're mentioning might suggest that people you sense that people might be seeing into you beyond that apparent surface, the the opacity of thinking, we can judge by appearances, right? And this is part of what aging is about. And ageism is really kind of a tough thing because many people do judge people for being old. They assume that you're feeble or you're going to start losing your marbles or you're falling apart, whatever. And as we get older, we do experience probably more health challenges. I certainly have. But in so many ways, it's also made me real aware of what I really value, being opaque may just mean people's having a superficial or shallow view of you. They just see you, you know. Transparency might mean they can really see more to you, more of what's really there. I don't know.
Well, and for me, it's about I can let the essence of who I am radiate.
Hmm.
It's not just about the physical, because as a female who grew
Right.
up in corporate America, then left corporate America, it was about how you look. And no matter how you looked, it never was quite adequate. And no matter what these variations of acceptance.
Hmm.
Well, as I age, that physicality is less important to me. And it's more about just radiating who I am.
Who you are. Yeah.
So it's like I tell the story of the dragonfly,
Yeah.
and everyone has told the story of the butterfly. It's been the big metaphor, but for me, it's the dragonfly because they live as a nymph in water, just eating and being predators of whatever they can find,
Hmm.
and they molt over and over. And
Hmm.
then something stimulates a gene or something, and all
Hmm.
of a sudden they have the desire to come up out of the water onto a stem or a
Hmm.
blade. And so they
Yeah.
come up, and then they are introduced to air and light. And
Hmm.
the air and the light catalyzes something in them.
Yeah.
And as and then there's a third thing, that they begin to unfurl those translucent wings, and that body comes up, the thorax, and it uses the water that they brought in with them as they climbed as a pump to help them unfurl. But
Wow.
it's moving from under
Amazing.
to up. It's an ascendant story in a trimester, a triad. And to me, that's part of the life story, birth and rebirth and da 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 da. But um, I'm just so enamored by these dragonflies.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and dragonflies are often used to represent spirit or, essence or um I guess, my own experience too is that there are certain people, this is not a judgment of anyone else, but certain people at certain times strike me as just being luminous beings. They're really, really radiant, And I'm thinking of a particular friend of mine who, is from Mexico. And you're kind of like this, and certain people that what I really have come to feel over time is that what I'm seeing when I look at someone like you or this friend I'm thinking of is I see the inner light, you know? It's not just the surface. There's something radiating from within the person. And I don't even mean that really in a metaphysical or woo-woo way at all. It's just, it's like the aura. What is the aura? Well, you can talk about all sorts of metaphysical stuff, but to me, the aura is sensing uh the total energy of what somebody is about, or and it doesn't even have to be a person. I think kitty cats, for example, seem to have a huge aura. That's a strange thing, much bigger than a person's aura lots of times. And
Boundaries are so big.
yeah, and I have this really funny feeling as the season changes and it gets so hot here in the summer, and I don't care for the heat much. I grew up in a tropical country, but um, I can feel the temperature outside as if my aura extends beyond the house, you know? Even if we have a nice AC, central AC, and a nice house heater, but in the cooler weather, I get kind of invigorated by the fact that I can feel the cold outside as if my aura goes beyond the house. And in the
Yes.
summer, sometimes I kind of go, oh, it's hot, even though it's cool in the house. So,
Sensing, just like that dragonfly comes up, and then the sun and the light are a different catalyst than
yeah,
being one. Yes.
in the
And it goes
water,
back
that's right.
also to that lightness or heaviness of energy.
Yeah.
As our physical dissipates, it can either become really heavy energy, if people are struggling and whatever, or it can become lighter. I mean, I've seen that in people who leave the planet and when they
Oh,
leave.
yeah, and that it's really interesting that you use that metaphor of the dragonfly in this case instead of the butterfly, which is a beautiful and common, story for transformation. But there's something about using the water element and harvesting all that the water element can provide, and then, like you said, kind of ascending up into the air and the light with it, and then allowing that to perform that transformation, and those beautiful wings open up. Yeah,
They're so delicate. And that metaphor takes me right to, the cosmos and the net and the so I'm
yeah.
gonna check the time. We're having this conversation. Do you mind if I put some of this up on the web?
Oh, that's fine. That's fine. I think it would be
I think
lovely then.
I think that what you offer um, is
Yeah.
beautiful, and I so appreciate having
Well,
you join me. It just makes me
oh,
so happy.
well, it's been an honor, Joanne, to share with you. You have always inspired me. I've known you for many years, and I my admiration for you just continues to grow. I honestly, you have so much to offer, and I think that many people can benefit from, even from having it on. Is it going to be on YouTube or Vimeo or something, huh?
I'll
Yeah,
put it on. I'll decide. I'll put a link out and let us know. But I think the sharing for other people will be valuable.
absolutely, absolutely, and it's been
Yes,
valuable
yes.
for me too.
Yeah, always for me, always for me. So I'm going to stop the recording. Let me stop that.